In this video, we are going over the strongest 5 builds we can use to break bosses in NG+7, Elden Ring's highest difficulty. There are multiple weapons we can use to deal high damage even under these conditions. I created the following setups in order to grant you the highest performance possible in max scaling, while at the same time having enough versatility to choose from a wide variety of weapons and damage sources. All these builds are level 200, which I consider to be an optimal level for this difficulty, but you can always go higher if you wish. There are certain things these builds share that are not worth repeating every time I explain a setup, the most consistent being the blood-sucking crack tier. This item increases your damage by 20% at the cost of some HP in time. The aura and body buffs. I prepared every build to use the same buffs, which are Golden Vow and Howl of Shabriri, to stack as much damage as possible. Just be aware that Howl of Shabriri also increases the damage you receive. We also need a seal to cast the buffs I just mentioned. And in most cases we are gonna use the Rakshasa set because it increases our damage by 8% when wearing the entire set, but I will make sure to point out any significant change in every single build. With that being said, let's jump straight into it. Number 5. Raw Strength. The main feature of this build is a simple playstyle with high damage output, without having to rely on high affinity damage or status effects build up. This setup is for those who enjoy using physical damage and melee combat over anything else. The main Ashes of War we're gonna be using are Crack Bleed, Royal Knight's Resolve, or as you already noticed, Lion's Claw or Savage Lion's Claw. And of course, the main affinity for our weapons is always gonna be heavy. I thought about this build being prepared to take a couple of hits due to the type of weapons we are using. This is the perfect setup if besides having strong damage, you also want to have the chance of retreating to heal. Most of my builds tend to rely on beating the bosses in seconds to not having to worry about their strongest attacks, but I have to admit I really like this one because I think it's friendly for the casual and experienced player. In this case, we are gonna use 60 on Vigor, 44 on Endurance, 99 on Strength, and 33 on Faith. The stats I didn't mention, you can use them at any level you want, but in order to deal the same damage I'll be dealing, you just need to have a 99 on Strength and 33 on Faith. As you can see, we have high Vigor and high Endurance. This will help a lot when it comes to damage trading with the enemy. We can use a heavier armor set. I forget to mention at the start of the video that the Erdtree blessing must be in the level 20 in every single build, otherwise our damage in the DLC is not gonna be good. Remember, Erdtree blessing in the level 20 for every single build. The buffs are Golden Vow and Howl of Shabriri. However, if you don't want to take extra damage, you can also use the Flame Granny Strength, but it doesn't last as much as Howl of Shabriri. With a setup like this, we can use an insane variety of weapons, but at least the ones I consider to be the best for this setup are the Gods' Greatsword, the Star Fist, the Giant Crusher, and the Roster Anchor, especially the Dual Roster Anchor. Now the talismans will change a little bit depending on the weapon we are gonna use, so I'm gonna explain the setup for each one first. When it comes to the Greatsword, we are using the Savage Lion's Claw, but you can also use the regular Lion's Claw. When using the Gods' Greatsword, I recommend you to equip the Freya's Greatsword in your offhand. This way your damage when using Savage Lion's Claw or Lion's Claw is gonna be increased by 10%. It's not necessary, but it's extra damage for free basically. For defense, we are gonna use the Knight's Cavalry Armor set, Gods' Greatsword setup, Shard of Alexander, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Axe Talisman, and Dragon Crest Great Shield. If you think you don't need more defense, you can use the Crusade Insignia because it increases your damage after defeating an enemy, especially useful after beating Radagon to encounter the Elden Beast. A great alternative that works amazing in this difficulty is the All Lord's Talisman because it increases the duration of our buffs. And remember, in every build we are going to use the Blood-Sucking Crack tier, and in this case, if we are going to be using the Gods' Greatsword, it's going to be the Spike Crack tier. I always like to use some Pickled Turtlenecks in my builds. This item boosts your stamina regeneration speed, but is completely optional. A great alternative for Howl of Shabriri if you don't want to take the Fate all the way up to 33 is the Bloodwell Aromatic, because it increases your physical damage by 30% for an entire minute, but instead of being like Howl of Shabriri that you can cast it with FP, this one needs to be farmed, and as you can see I only have like 38 left, so that is the main disadvantage of this one. Now when using the Star Fist, the setup is gonna change significantly. With this weapon we are gonna be using the Crack Blade Ash of War to get the most out of its R2 attacks. So in this case we're gonna use the Axe Talisman, the Roaring Windsor Insignia, and the Millicent's Prosthesis. Why are we using multi-hit buffs in a strength build? Because as I said, the R2 attacks of this weapon are incredibly fast. This way we can actually combine the heavy attacks buffs and the multi-hit buffs. And as the last talisman, we can use whatever you want. You have to understand that sometimes the situation allows you to use different talismans. For instance, despite we are in NG+7, there are a couple of enemies where we can actually get the crit hit. It's not a lot of enemies, but some of them give us that opportunity. So in those cases, we can always carry the Blade of Mercy or the Dagger Talisman. If you want to use the Giant Crusher with Royal Knight's Resolve or Crack Blade, The setup is gonna be pretty similar. Axe Talisman, in this case 2-handed Sword Talisman is much better. You can either use the Viridian Amber Medallion as well, the Dragon Crest Great Shield, or any other talisman you find useful. If you want to use the Rusted Anchor, I recommend you to use 2 of them, with Crackblade or with Royal Knight's Resolve. With Crackblade is much easier, so I recommend you to go with Crackblade, and I recommend you to use the Greybird's Blackwheel Armor or the Raptor's Black Feathers, because with the jump attacks we can stack an insane amount of damage, 10% here and 10% with the Cloud Talisman. The multi-hit buffs are gonna be increasing our damage slightly if we keep attacking continuously. This is a little bit risky, so the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman might be a great option here. And when it comes to the physique, in this case we actually changed it. I recommend you to change it for the Thorny Crack tier, because we are gonna be using the jump attacks, so the Spike Crack tier is gonna be basically useless, and the Thorny Crack tier slightly but will increase our damage. As we are talking about NG+7, which is the max difficulty in Elden Ring, a Bleed build is always a great option, and this one will be the culmination of the OG Bleed builds, the classic Dexterity and Arcane split to use fast hitting weapons, such as katanas like the Rivers of Blood and the Nagakiba, the Reduvia Dagger, or even more cheesy setups like dual Naginatas or dual Curved Swords. Regardless of which one you prefer to use, this setup is designed to deal high damage with all of them, so it's up to you how fast you wanna get rid of the bosses in this game. The main advantage of this setup is how fast we can proc bleed on enemies due to the insanely fast-paced combat we enable with this type of weapons, besides of also reaching the max stages of the multi-hit buffs almost instantly, making of builds like this a complete menace against every single boss in the whole game, even against those enemies resistant or immune to bleed like Radagon or the Elden Beast. In addition, having high dexterity also lets you use lightning damage weapons like a katana with lightning slash or the Bolt of Grandsax for instance, but I only recommend you to use them to clear regular mobs, because in boss fights the bleed weapons are way better. For this build we're gonna use 50 on Vigor, 35 Endurance, 80 in Strength, 75 Dexterity, 33 on Faith and 45 on Arcane. This way we're gonna be getting the max damage possible out of all the weapons we are gonna use. We have the same buffs available, Golden Vow, Half Shabriri and Flame Grant Me Strength if you don't want to take more damage. And in this case you can also use the Swarm of Flies. This is not a buff, but it's a really helpful spell if you want to proc bleed faster. Before explaining each weapon setup, I'm gonna explain the talismans because they are gonna be consistent for the entirety of the build and only one is gonna change. The talismans that we are always gonna use is the Lord of Blood's Exultation, Millicent's Prosthesis and Roaring Windsor Insignia. In the same way, the tier is not gonna change at all, Bloodsucking tier and the Thorny Crack tier to boost our damage on successive hits. If we want to use the dual Naginatas, we can either use them on Seppuku against bleed enemies or with Crackblade against those enemies that are resistant to bleed. This is a bleed build, so every weapon that is infusable must be on the bleed affinity. If using the dual Naginatas, the best option is using the Rakshasa's armor set. It's a bit risky because it doesn't have the best defense, and as far as I know it increases our damage slightly, so when stacking it with Hall of Shabriri can be dangerous, but in general the damage increase is gonna be very useful. For the dual Naginata setup, the best one is the Spear Talisman, because we are constantly dealing pierce damage with the power stance moveset of this dual setup, and this talisman is gonna increase our counterattack damage significantly. A counterattack occurs when we hit an enemy while the enemy is performing an attack. A great example of this is the Radan's Explosion attack. While he's casting the explosion, we can deal extra damage with this talisman equipped. We deal extra damage by default because it's a counterattack, but with this talisman equipped, the damage is even more significant. If we want to power stance the Curved Swords, it's basically the same than with the dual Naginatas. Seppuku for regular enemies, and for those enemies resistant to bleed, Crackblade. Instead of the regular chest of the Rakshasa set, we are gonna use the Greybird's Blackwheel Armor or the Raptor's Black Feathers to boost our jump attacks. And the last talisman is gonna be the Claw Talisman instead of the Spirit Talisman to boost the damage of our jump attacks, stacking it with the Greybird's Blackwheel Armor or Raptor's Black Feathers. If we want to use the Nagakiba with double slash on the bleed affinity as well, the best option is using the Rakshasa's armor set, and the last talisman is gonna be the Shard of Alexander. As all of these weapons are dealing only physical damage, maybe the best alternative is Blood Boil Aromatic, but remember this item has to be crafted, while on the other hand Hall of Shabriri only requires FP, and as I previously told you, these builds are prepared to use Hall of Shabriri and Golden Vow, so it's up to you if you want to craft the Blood Boil Aromatic. Both options are great in general, and if it happens you want to use the Rivers of Blood, your best option is using the Ansbach set, because this one is gonna increase the damage of the Corpse Piler by 15%. That is a massive damage buff for the Ash of War of this weapon, which is basically a better version of double slash, at least when it comes to how it looks, because the performance of both weapons is pretty similar. The talismans we can use for the Rivers of Blood are exactly the same than for the Nagakiba, and basically the same than for the rest of the weapons. The only significant change is the Shard of Alexander. And if you want to use the Rivers of Blood, then I don't recommend you to use Blood Boil Aromatic, because this weapon has fire damage as well, so using Hall of Shabriri is much better, because that buff is gonna boost every type of damage, not only physical. I am not a big fan of full sorcerer setups, course, but when it comes to the Spellblade builds I'm always down for some crazy fights. In this case this build is based on using strong magic damage weapons like the Moonveil Katana or the Death's Poker to get rid of those targets that are pretty much free. But against those tough bosses that appear to be impossible to deal with using weapons like these, we are completely prepared to use high DPS sorceries like Night Comet or even better the Carrying Slicer. As far as I know, Night Comet is a bit stronger, but the Slicer is just really fun to play and quite stylish. However, it requires a bit of more knowledge about bosses' behavior and combat mechanics like stamina management. So if what you want is just destroy hard enemies quickly and from a safe distance, the Night Comet is your best option. This spell is really amazing because the bosses won't realize they are being attacked with a projectile damage source, making combats like Malenia or Relana completely trivial as long as you know to keep your distance. For this amazing magic damage build we're gonna use 50 Vigor, 30 on Mind to have enough FP points to cast spells and stuff. We are gonna use 35 on Endurance, 15 on Strength, 80 on Dexterity, 90 on Intelligence to get that magic damage as high as possible, and 33 on Fate to use our traditional buffs Golden Vow and Hall of Shabriri. For this build we are gonna be using an additional buff if it's possible during the fights, which is Terra Magica. It's not completely necessary but it's always helpful to have extra damage, especially in this difficulty. As I previously told you, the spells we are gonna be using are Night Comet and Carrying Slicer. As you can see we have 90 Intelligence, so that basically means we can use any spell we wish. I always forget to mention about Great Runes because they are limited items, but as we have level 200 builds, the ones I recommend you to use is the Godric's Great Rune or the Radan's Great Rune. Those are my favorite ones, especially in this difficulty. This build also has multiple weapons we can use. We have melee weapons and range options. Let's begin with the Death's Poker and the Moonveil. In this case the setup is gonna be the same for both weapons, which is amazing. We're gonna use the Death's Poker maxed out and the Moonveil on +10 as well. The best armor set we can use for this build if we don't care about having low defense is the Spellblade set because it's gonna increase the damage of the Ghost Flame Ignition and Transient Moonlight by 8%. It's slightly better than the Rakshasa's armor set when it comes to the magic abilities, but you can always use the Rakshasa set, like here is up to you. The main advantage of the Rakshasa set over this one is that this armor set only boosts the damage of the skills and the Rakshasas boost the damage of the whole moveset. But I really like how this one looks when it comes to a mage or a Spellblade build. Talisman setup for the Death's Poker and the Moonveil, Shard of Alexander, Magic Scorpion Charm, the Rilana's Cameo. This one is exclusively for the Moonveil because it's gonna boost the damage of Transient Moonlight if we wait a little bit. And the All Lord's Talisman, which is gonna increase the duration of our buffs. Very important because we have to use Hall of Shabriri in this one. Blood Bowl Aromatic is not an option in this build because we are dealing physical and magic damage. And if we are planning to use only spells, then it's only magic damage. So it's very important to use Hall of Shabriri and Terra Magica. And in the Flask of Wondrous Fizzy, we are gonna use the same regardless of which armament we choose to use. It's gonna be Bloodsucking Cracktear and Magic Shrouding Cracktear, and that's it. If we want to use the Night Comet, the best staff we can use is the Staff of Loss on +25, and I highly recommend you to use another one in your offhand to stack the passive effect they have. As you can see, they boost the Invisibility Sorcery, which is the School of the Night Comet. So if we use 2 of them, our damage is gonna be pretty insane. Even better than if we use only one for the passive effect and another one with high sorcery scaling. This one is for the Night Comet, and the same principle applies for the Glintstone Staff that is gonna boost the damage of the Carrying Slicer. And as you can see, the passive effect of this one is boost Carrion Sword Sorcery. This way we are gonna boost the damage of that Carrying Slicer a lot. Now, when using the sorceries, the Rakshasa set is gonna be much better than the Spellblade set, but the damage of the sorceries is already pretty high, so it's kind of optional. If you feel like using it and you're not afraid of taking extra damage, go ahead. And the main advantage of using the spells is that you're gonna be in a safe distance, and the Carrying Slicer, despite being a close range spell, is really easy to use. The talisman setup for spellcasting is gonna be the same: Graven Mask Talisman, Graven Skull Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, and the All Lord's Talisman. And that is our magic build. When it comes to the Fate stat, there is a lot of misinformation about how this attribute works and how broken it actually is. Most players assume a Fate build is a pure spellcaster build, when in reality it's the perfect stat to get the most out of the strongest weapons in the whole game, like the Fire Knight's Greatsword or the Blasphemous Blade. By using the Flame Art or Sacred Affinity in a high level character, you can get an insane AR with the Fire Knight's Greatsword, allowing you to deal massive chunks of damage regardless of the enemies you are fighting. If it's resistant to fire, you use holy damage. If it's resistant to holy, you use fire damage. Not to mention, Taker's Flame is such an overpowered Ash of War and extremely good for this difficulty because you can heal while attacking. But if that wasn't enough, you can also deal massive lightning damage with this same build, not having to change a single stat point. To be honest, Fate is completely underrated. Just by leveling up this stat, you deal high damage and unlock multiple buffs for your character. In my opinion, Fate is completely broken. In this case we have a hybrid build. This is a melee combat and spellcaster build, so we are gonna use 60 on vigor, 25 mind, 38 endurance, 22 on strength, 18 on dexterity, and 99 on faith, which is the main stat of this setup. Golden Vow and Hall of Shabriri are our main buffs. Flame grant me strength is only useful if you are planning to deal fire damage and if you don't want to take extra damage, but Hall of Shabriri is a way better body buff. And the best advantage of using High Faith is that we can use incantations like Blessing of the Erdtree that is gonna be a passive heal that is gonna help a lot to counter the HP draining effect of the blood-sucking crack tier. And as damage dealing incantations we can use Knight's Lightning Spear and Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike. In the same way I'm gonna be explaining the setup per weapon, and the main weapon of this build is gonna be the Fire Knight's Greatsword on plus 25 with the Crack Blade or Royal Knight's Resolve Ash of War on either the Flame Mart or Sacred Affinity depending on the targets we are gonna be facing. Obviously if the target is resistant to fire damage we can use the Sacred Affinity. The best armor set to use with this weapon is the Rakshasa's armor set. You already know which one it is, that's why I haven't equipped it right now. But yeah, if you want the highest damage possible with this weapon, then Rakshasa's armor set. When it comes to the talismans, we're gonna use the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Axe Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, or Sacred Scorpion Charm. It will depend on which affinity you are using at that moment. And the All Lord's Talisman to increase the duration of our buffs. With this build we're gonna be dealing mainly affinity damage, so Blood Boil Aromatic is not gonna be an option, and Hall of Shabriri, remember that only lasts 40 seconds, so having the All Lord's Talisman is a huge help. In the Flask of Wondrous Physic, as always, Blood Sucking Crack tier, both is gonna be with Flame Shrouding Crack tier or Holy Shrouding Crack tier, depending on the target we are facing. And to dramatically increase our fire damage, we can use the Hefty Oil Pot or the regular Oil Pot. What this item does is that it increases the damage of the next fire damage instance by 50% the regular one and 65% the big one. What I mean by next instance is the next hit, and it's gonna be only the next hit. So you coat your target on oil and the next hit is gonna be huge, so you better use it with a strong Ash of War hit or with a charge to attack. If you are actually planning on using these items, I highly recommend you to run the Fire Knight's Greatsword with Royal Knight's Resolve instead of Crack Blade, so that damage can be really stupid. For the Blasphemous Blade, Blood-Sucking and Flame Shrouding Crack tier, we are gonna be using the Shard of Alexander, Talisman of the Tread, Fire Scorpion Charm, and once again the All Lord's Talisman. The best armor set for the Blasphemous Blade once again is gonna be Rakshasa's set, and once again you can use the Hefty Oil Pot or the regular Oil Pots to boost the damage of the Taker's Flames. Another nice weapon class I like to use with this High Faith setup is the Greatswords. In this case, for the Sacred and Flame Art affinity, the best one is the Iron Greatsword because it will preserve a massive amount of physical damage as well. So we are gonna end up having a nice amount of physical damage and affinity damage combined. I like to use the Iron Greatsword on plus 25 or on Sacred or Flame Art affinity with the Piercing Fang Ash War. In Sacred affinity is fantastic against those enemies vulnerable to holy damage, like Promise Consort Radang in the first phase for instance. If you are planning to use this weapon with this specific Ash of War, the best talisman setup is gonna be the Sacred Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, the Spear Talisman, and once again the All Lord's Talisman. And in the Flask of Wondrous Physic now it's gonna be the Blood-Sucking tier with the Holy Shrouding Crack tier or the Flame Shrouding Crack tier depending on the target. Is the same, because despite I'm recommending it on Sacred, you can always change to Flame Art and you change the Sacred Scorpion Charm for the Fire Scorpion Charm and the Holy Shrouding for the Flame Shrouding tier. This is not the main approach of this build, but if you enjoy doing guard counters, the Black Steel Great Hammer is a great option because it's gonna work amazing in the Flame Mart or Sacred affinity with the Crack Blade or Royal Knight's Resolve Ash of War. In this case I don't have any single one applied, but those are the ones that you want to use if you're gonna be using this weapon. If you are planning on doing guard counters, the animation of this one is kind of slow, so I recommend you to use a better armor set, not the Rakshasas, because it's gonna be destroying you. This one is not so bad, so you can use this one. This one is mostly prepared for the incantations, but you can decide which armor set you wanna use if you are going for the guard counters. As for the talismans, we're gonna use the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Curved Sword Talisman, Great Shield Talisman, and once again the All Lord's Talisman. In the Flask of Wondrous Physic, as always, you are not gonna remove this one. The Blood-Sucking Crack tier is always gonna be there, and we're gonna be pairing it with the Deflecting Heart tier, which is an amazing tier you can use for guard counter setups. As we are in NG+7, the best Ash of War for that approach is gonna be Crack Blade. If you are really hardcore and you really want to deal insane damage, then Royal Knight's Resolve, but it's way more difficult to use. And last but not least, if what we want to use are the incantations Knight's Lightning Spear and Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, we need two Gravelstone Seals. One needs to be fully upgraded, and it's the one we are gonna be using to cast the incantations, but the other one is to stack its passive effect that, as you can see, it boosts the Dragon Cult incantations. So by using 2 we stack this passive effect, the same concept than with the Sorcerer build. The main reason why I was using the Death Knight armor set this entire explanation is because this armor set also buffs the Dragon Cult incantations and Dragon Cult skills by a total of 8% while having a very decent damage negation stats. However, if what you want is more damage, then you have to remove this armor set and use the Priestess Heart. When using this item, you're gonna turn into a dragon, and if you use it again, you're gonna trigger a buff that is gonna increase the damage of the Dragon Cult incantations by 20%, which is much more than the other armor set. However, as you can see, our resistances change and our damage negation change as well. So we're gonna be more vulnerable despite dealing more damage. So it's a trade. You deal more damage, but you are more vulnerable. Even at 60 vigor, you are risking to be one-shotted. As for the talismans, the Flux Canvas Talisman, Faithful's Canvas Talisman, Godfrey Icon, and Lightning Scorpion Charm. In the Flask of Wondrous Physic, Blood-Sucking Cracktear and Lightning Shrouding Cracktear. One of the most common questions I've seen in my channel is what is the best bleed build in the entire game? Dual Gargoyles Twin Blades, Dual Naginatas, or Dual Bandits Curve Swords? But the truth is that all of them serves a different purpose. In this case, we're talking about the Gargoyles Twin Blades in the last spot because I consider them to be the most effective in general. Regardless of the scenario, the Dual Gargoyles Twin Blades will shred the bosses to pieces. On the other hand, the Dual Naginatas are the best when the target is weak to pierce damage like Consort Radan. However, when the enemy is weak to slash like the Fire Giant or Mesmer, the Bandit's Curve Swords are way better. Every option is great and will carry your chicks through the entire game, but with the Gargoyles you don't have to worry about anything. It's just spam jump attacks, high bleed for every enemy and high base damage for enemies immune to bleed. But there is also another reason to choose this build as the number 1 for this video. We have the perfect stats to also use the Marae's Executioner Sword, the Ancient Meteoric or Greatsword, or any other weapon that could take advantage of such a unique build. Strength and Arcane Split is completely broken because it enables high base damage, cool unique weapons, and destructive bleed procs. And for this final build, we are gonna be using 50 on Vigor, 35 Endurance, 80 Strength, 10 Dexterity, 33 on Faith, and 50 on Arcane. The stats distribution is because this way we are gonna be dealing the highest damage possible with the weapons we are gonna use. But you can always level up your Vigor for more resistance, more mind, more endurance, whatever you want to make your build better, depending on how many levels you are willing to spend. Golden Vow and Hall of Shabriri once again are the main buffs. Before starting with the weapons, it's gonna be very similar to the previous bleed build because we are gonna use the Lord of Blood's Exultation, Millicent's Prosthesis, and Rory Windsor Insignia in almost every setup. So these ones are gonna be present most of the time. I also forgot to mention in the previous bleed build that the White Mask is gonna increase our damage by 10% with each bleed proc. So the first weapon setup we have here are the Dual Gargoyles Twin Blades on plus 25 with either the Crackblade Ash of War or the Seppuku Ash of War on the bleed affinity. Crackblade Ash of War is better when facing targets that are immune to bleed, but in general the best approach is using Seppuku. We are pairing this with 2 pieces of the Rakshasa's armor set, the Greybird's Blackwill armor to boost the damage of our jump attacks, and stack it with the Claw Talisman. And once again the White Mask to get a 10% damage buff with each bleed proc. For the Talisman, Claw Talisman, Lord of Blood's Exultation, Millicent's Prosthesis, and Roaring Windsor Insignia. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic in this case nothing is gonna change at all with the majority of the setups, Blood-Sucking Cracktear and Thorny Cracktear. In this case, as you can see, we have once again the Blood Boil Aromatic, the same idea we previously discussed. If you have time to farm them, if you have a way to get them quickly, go ahead with the Blood Boil Aromatic, but if you don't want to be crafting an item, Hall of Shabriri is gonna work just perfectly fine. If it happens that we enjoyed so much the Dual Naginatas, especially because they are insanely good against the DLC bosses, such as Radan, we cannot use the Dual Naginatas here because they scale mostly of Dexterity, but we can use the Dual Bloodfiend's Fork on the bleed affinity with Seppuku or Crackblade depending on the target, but as you can see this weapon scales of Strength and Arcane, so it's gonna be dealing more damage out of the stats we are using. If we really want to use the Bloodfiend's Fork, then we are not gonna use the Greybird's Blackwill armor, it's gonna be the other piece of the Rakshasa set and the Spirit Talisman. In this case I don't have it ready here, it should be the Spirit Talisman if we want to use the Bloodfiend's Fork. As you can see I also have equipped the Marae's Executioner Sword here, and it's because it's an amazing weapon that is gonna scale directly of the stats distribution we have. And because the skill Iocha's Dancing Blade is completely broken. If we want to use this weapon, the best armor set we can use is the Dancer set, because it's gonna boost the damage of our skill by 10%. 2% better than the Rakshasa set is slightly more damage. If you don't want to change anything, you can keep the Rakshasa set. When it comes to the talismans for this weapon, Godfrey Icon, Shard of Alexander, Millicent's Prosthesis, and Roaring Windsor Insignia, and the same setup on the Flask of Wondrous Physic, Thorny Cracktear, Blood-Sucking Tear. If you wanna use the Marae's Sword, it's much better to use Hall of Shabriri instead of Blood Boil Aromatic, just so you know. If what you want to use is the Ancient Meteorical Greatsword, which is one of the best colossal swords in the entire game, I recommend you to run the Rakshasa's armor set entirely, unless you don't want to take extra damage of course, but if you want to get the most out of the weapon, this is the best option you have. Two-handed sword talisman, Shard of Alexander, axe talisman, and the All Lord's talisman, because once again it's recommended to use Hall of Shabriri with this weapon because it has a splitted damage. If you want to deal more damage, instead of using this one, you can always use the Spear talisman, but I don't have it ready right now, and it's conditional, it's not as effective as with the Bloodfiend's fork. It requires a more precise gameplay, so the All Lord's talisman is a much better option. And when it comes to the tier, the Blood-sucking crack tier is gonna be okay. You can stick with the Thorny crack tier, but I will go with the Spike crack tier to use the archer attacks. If you don't want to modify your tier because you wanna use the other weapons, then stick to the Thorny, but if you want to get more damage out of this one, you can use either the Spike crack tier or the Stonebark crack tier for more stance damage, which is something we really lack of in NG+7. And those are our builds, guys. Let me know in the comment section, what do you guys think of the builds we saw today? Those are the best builds you can use in NG+7.